Today, my mom slipped on ice and broke her ankle. The person whose house she fell in front of came out and yelled at us when I came to help, saying I wasn't her son and how dare I use his driveway. Reddit, what moments have you had where you just thought, what the frick is wrong with you? I once parked my car on the street, completely legally, when visiting a friend. Some guy comes running out of the house yelling at me saying that was his parking spot. He had a large driveway that could easily park 6 cars, but here he is, yelling at me for parking on the street I was completely and totally morally and legally entitled to park on. I pointed to the street sign saying it was okay to park, and he yelled, "I don't care what the fricking sign says, you butthole. Move your fricking car or you will regret it." I ignored his threat and went to visit my friend. It was a late night, and I came out about 3 AM to drive home, only to discover that someone, wonder who, had let the air out of all my tires. Luckily for me I own an air compressor, so I hooked it up to my car's cigarette lighter and pumped the air back into my tires. It was pretty cold out, and not the greatest compressor in the world, so it was a miserable 20 minutes or so. Once I was done, I returned the favor, letting the air out of all the tires in the 4 cars in his driveway as well as his boat trailer. I also superglued his mailbox closed. That made me feel better. Should have glued the valves on his tires. Pretty minor compared to a lot of these, but back when I was 13 or so, my cousin and I were at a small town Mardi Gras parade. We found a convenient spot and stood there, waiting for the parade to start. About 30 seconds later a man tapped my cousin on the shoulder and started cussing her and me out big time for being in his way. Fricking kids, no fricking respect these days, raised by TV and single moms, etc. I turned around and saw an empty folding chair about 30 feet from the roadway, presumably his. Yes, people do set out folding chairs to watch parades, but they usually set them up about 5 feet away from the road, not 30. Yes, we were standing in his way, but that's like yelling at someone for skipping you in the grocery line when you're standing in the produce section. Be there or don't. And a simple "I was here to watch the parade and you're standing in front of me. Could you please find somewhere else" would have worked. He didn't have to automatically go to fricking kids with no respect. Out of spite, he got to stare at the backs of our heads for the next half hour instead of the parade. We caught lots of beads. I was in the car with my grandma on a large 4-lane road in town. A car next to us sideswiped us. Pretty hard actually, so we pulled over to do the whole information exchange thing. The woman in the other car leaps out and starts screaming at my grandma saying, "You are the rudest person I've ever seen. You wouldn't let me over." I had my blinker on. I was completely taken aback. My grandma is the sweetest old lady, and had either of us actually seen her blinker I know Gram would let her over. But there was heavy traffic and her car was directly beside us. I dealt with the beast and the Camry and got her insurance. She ended by saying, "This isn't my fault, that woman should let people over." I laughed, which took her aback. I said, "You're 100% at fault here. And by the way, a blinker is not a yield sign even if we had seen it. Learn how to drive before you hurt or kill someone." Then we left. I was pretty happy when Gram told me her insurance had accepted liability and the agent told her something to the effect of, "Yes, she yells at us too." You're dealing with the typical driver who never uses her blinkers unless she feels she cannot get away without it, like in your case with heavy traffic. In such a scenario, this kind of driver now feels that since she has been so nice as to use her blinker, anyone who does not respect her needs is rude. Where I live, at least half the drivers here are like that. It boggles the mind. My gran fell on the curb in front of my house when she was getting out of her car and broke her hip. She was lying on the ground crying when she said a stranger passed. My gran asked her to just knock on our front door and the person just stared at her and kept walking, and my gran waited an hour until my dad came out and found her. What kind of person just stares at a little 80-year woman crying on the ground? Frick that person. One of my dogs, Golden Lab, was outside running with me and my brother when we heard a lot of barking. We turn around and a Doberman and another large dog, looked kinda like a Rhodesian Ridgeback, were chasing us. I'd met the owners a few times and knew that they had an invisible fence, but I guess it was off. Basically, the dogs mauled my dog and bit my forearm, but I held them off from my brother and he ran home with my dog. I went to their house a couple hours later, after washing out my dog's cuts, and confronted them about it. I asked them basically just to ensure that the fence was working, pay the vet bill, and asked if the dogs weren't diseased. The guy's response was, "Your dog should grow a pair. My dogs aren't even that big," and slammed the door in my face. My family raised heck and the guy ended up paying a nice sum of money. My dog is fine but has some issues with one of her front legs sometimes. I was managing a restaurant on a busy weekend when the tornado sirens went off and the radio told everyone to take cover immediately. My hosts ran to take cover and call their kids at home. Some douchebag customer decides to start yelling at me to seat him immediately. This was ridiculous. He didn't need to take cover. A tornado did hit, about a mile away. I'm sorry, but I am terrified of tornadoes. Those are actually one of my top 3 fears. If I had been in your place, I would have probably screamed at him to take freaking cover, or else I'll knock him unconscious and make him take cover. I used to work in a record store, and during one of our busy moments of the day, a co-worker started to have a seizure up by the cash registers. I immediately stopped ringing up a customer to go help my co-worker and try to figure out what to do. About 2 minutes into me helping my co-worker, whom everyone could see was needing help, a customer asks if we could hurry up and check them out. I remarked that I'm sorry that I was busy helping someone that was having a seizure and they'd have to wait a couple minutes. Of course the customer gives me an angry, frustrated look and starts back talking. After I get the situation taken care of, I go to check the customer out and all they were trying to buy was a CD for 25 cents. Upon the customer leaving, they remarked that they would never come back because of the slow service. Bro, just wow. My friend got hit by a car at an intersection. The girl was speeding. After my friend literally flies over the car and lands on the pavement, the driver pulls over and starts to yell at my friend who got hit. She doesn't even take out her phone to call 911 or anything. She just goes on about how this is the second accident this month. Why weren't you looking? Do you know how much this will cost me? I was thinking, WTF lady, you just hit my friend with your car. Shut the frick up. You'd think it would flip a switch in her head, since it was the second accident that month. When I was 21, I got my first big kid job, so I decided to buy myself a new, used car since my clunker was awful. I got a beautiful Pontiac G6. I loved it. Exactly 3 weeks after I bought it, I had to go back to the dealership to sign some paperwork so I could lower my car payment. My mom came with me. I was driving back home, going about 35 miles per hour, minding my own business, and this old man in a Chevy Avalanche, about 80 years old, pulled out of a parking lot right in front of me. Had he floored it, I would have barely missed him if I slammed on my brakes. However, he stopped to make sure nobody was coming from the other direction. I slam on my brakes, blare my horn, then T-bone his truck. The front end of my car was barely there, fluids leaking all over, airbags all in my face. My mom and I both got hurt, and this jackass decides to get out of his truck and start screaming at me, asking me why I hit his car, what is wrong with me, etc. I looked like I was all of 16 at the time, so I'm sure he thought he was right in his old brain of his. He kept physically coming toward me, swearing at me, screaming, even when the cop came. Finally, after 10 minutes of screaming, he asked if we were okay, to which my mother went off on him, that we weren't okay, and he had no right being on the road. Come to find out, he hadn't had a valid license for a few years. Seriously though, how did he think that I hit him on purpose? I worked at a small food stand like place once in Disney World. We closed at 3 every day after lunch, and were right next to another food place that remained open. Well, this day, a man came up to our window at around 3:30. We had already closed everything and demanded food. I told him nicely that all of our kitchen had been closed, but there's a similar restaurant, literally like 15 yards away, that served the same items. Well, he freaked out, started screaming and complaining about the service in front of his children and a bunch of other kids. He even called one of my co-workers a moron. I know he was fully aware of Disney's policies to never let anyone go unsatisfied. Maybe he'd get free crap, right? Well, he did. Food and drinks. As he was given this food that came from the neighboring kitchen, I remember I gave him the most "what the frick is wrong with you" look I had ever given, even in risk of losing my job for not looking Disney happy when around a guest. The part that peed me off most is that he acted like that in front of his children. and was rewarded. He didn't even say thank you. I was on the bus to a shopping mall and it was very crowded. Upon arriving, people massed for the doors, and when following behind the torrent of people, in my own pace, I suddenly see an old, 70-80 years woman silently frantic, standing in the middle of the massing crowd trying to get the attention of someone, with tears streaming down her face. Everyone in the entire bus just went by her, some pushing, others commenting but all ignoring. I ask her what's wrong and she points to the front of the bus where I see a pair of legs sticking out below the bus, in front of the front wheel. I can't pull him out. It's my husband, she cries. Apparently, her very old husband was hit in the head by the mirror of the bus, as the couple was waiting to get in, and he was unconscious and bleeding. The bus driver hadn't even noticed anything, so while I checked up on the husband, the bus driver closed the doors and initiated to pull out into traffic. I had to slam the glass really hard to get his attention, and if it wasn't for traffic blocking the road he would have pulled out regardless, thinking I was just a disgruntled, late would-be passenger. What sickens me about this experience is that some people are so busy with their own little lives that they are willing to ignore the tears of a crying old helpless lady, practically brushing up against them, because it might mean that her obvious discomfort might require excessive burdening aid from them that just doesn't fit the planned schedule. What the frick is wrong with some people? This is the only one that really made me sick to my stomach. For a while I worked at a gas station, and most of the time I had to sit in a small building and just watch what went on outside. I was doing a bit of paperwork one day when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. One customer was waving frantically to me, the pump hose in one hand, with no nozzle, and gas spraying everywhere. I slammed the emergency stop button, and alarms started going off everywhere. I ran outside with the absorption powder to try to get this massive spill under control, and at the same time, I was trying to explain to the people that were coming up to me why the pumps weren't working. At this point I was a bit unconcerned with customer service. My number one priority was to get this dangerous spill under control. The guy who broke the nozzle felt it was a good time to come up to me and tell me I need a refund for all that gas. You know, I understood that because the gasoline was shooting out onto the ground instead of his tank, he would eventually need his money back. But while the gasoline is still on the ground, and I'm desperately trying to clean it up so that nobody gets hurt, that is not the right time to demand a refund. Fortunately my manager came out. He had to call the fire department and tell them not to come, and he dealt with this guy and all the people that felt the need to tell me that they were in a hurry and when would the pumps come back on. Was on vacation in Winnipeg. Go for a Slurpee at the strip mall. Notice a car in the parking lot that just pulled up is leaking fluid. Fluid catches fire. Go into a store to get a fire extinguisher. Nope, don't have one. Next store, a restaurant with a specific oil fire extinguisher. Nope, what if we need it? Even though they have two. Into the grocery store. Nope, not our problem. What could have been a very simple fix, or at least attempt, turned into the car becoming a giant melted slag heap. Cars around it damaged, light pole destroyed, storefronts damaged, asphalt melted, etc. Pretty similar story. I was about 11, riding my bike that had, unknown to me, some pretty serious mechanical faults with the handlebars. I'm going towards a little bump in the curb, crossing the street, so I pull up a little, and suddenly the whole array comes off the frame, so I land in this tangle with my bike, half on the road. I'm pretty badly knocked and scraped up, and hey, I was 11, so I'm not exactly together, screaming and crying for my mother, etc. Some woman, all business suited, the only person in the vicinity, comes strutting by in these big tall heels, stops, leans over me, and goes shh, and walks off. I mean, who the frick does that? On my wife's 30th birthday, my mother sent her a happy birthday card in the morning. About an hour later my wife finds out her grandmother had passed away. She, of course, wasn't in the best of moods after that, so decided just to be alone for a couple of hours. Meanwhile, my mother composed an email to my wife several pages long going on about how rude my wife was for not thanking her for the e-card and how she's always been ungrateful and uncaring towards her. My wife called her and calmly informed my mom of why she hadn't replied to her e-card the very instant she got it, and my mom decides to get angry at me for not calling her right away to tell her not to get angry at my wife. When my mom confronted me about it, I only said, if you don't want to put your foot in your mouth, don't open it. You're a good husband. I head out for what I hope will be peaceful walk with my dog, a lab mix. At the end of the day, she's on a leash in the middle of the street. A full-grown German Shepherd comes tearing out her yard without warning and grabs my dog by the neck, starting to shake her as dogs do in a dog fight. My dog is not a fighter and just takes it. I begin kicking the German Shepherd to get it to let go, but it's not having much effect. My dog starts to whimper and I see later it's because the dog has bitten through her ear and it's torn. I increase the strength of my kicks and succeed in kicking the German Shepherd away from my dog, who then runs back in its yard. The owner comes up to me and yells at me angrily for kicking her dog. No apology. I was only wearing sneakers and her dog is unharmed. I say, you have to be killing me. She turns away, calling me an asshole, and begins screaming at the top of her lungs at her daughter. My wife tells me this dog may have bitten another walker. Cops get involved. Unbelievable. You have been visited by the safety doggo. Subscribe and you will be safe from all danger for the next 24 hours. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day, you magnificent people.